Okay, so picking up where we last left off, now that we have our tournament set up, as you can see here with the title, where it's located in our two divisions, we also have all our data imported from tabroom.com. It's now time to go ahead and move on to the all important part of actually setting up rounds, entering ballots, and printing off results. In addition to this, we'll also go ahead and look at other things such as how to change names on the fly, how to add names, little things like that. So that way, if something crops up during the tournament or right before it begins or as people are registering, it can be easily handled. The first thing I actually want to start off with, though, that I did not cover in setting up the tournament is to do backups. I'm a big believer and fan of backing up frequently. So all you need to do here is go to Format, like I've already done, go down to Data Backup and Restore, Store Backup Files. Copy all data files to a location of your choosing. Now, I get a little particular with how I do this. Specifically, if we see here, I'm going to go to Debate and Forensics. I'm going to click on TRPC Backups. It's been a while since I've used TRPC on this computer, but I'm going to go ahead and start a new one here. We'll call it for 2018-19. I'll go and open that up and create a new one for this specific tournament, which is CFL1. Once I have inside that tournament, I'm going to go and open up and put in for today's date, which is 11/9. Then lastly, one for the time. Tend to go by military with this, so it's going to be 21:34. Since, as you can tell there on my screen, it is 9:34 in the evening. Once I open up that final one, I will save. And I simply do that simply so that way I can keep track of the particular times that I'm saving at on the dates, because if you're working on setting up a tournament over multiple days and at multiple times, it may be handy to be able to reference previous times that you have done work. Okay, so now that I've backed up, what I'm going to go ahead and move on to now, since I have all that stuff in there, is I'm just going to look at something very briefly, which is if I needed to make a change. If, let's just say, a contestant decides that they're going to drop, finding that specific individual or team and going to delete contestant is the best way to do that. It should ask you if you're sure. We'll take a look here. Yes. And so you want to, it's a double check before you accidentally do something you might regret. I'm going to say no because this is just an example in this case. I will note, however, that you want to make sure if you're going to drop somebody or delete them to do it absolutely before the tournament starts. If somebody gets sick halfway through a 4-round tournament, let's say, and then they can't compete anymore and you decide you're going to go ahead and delete them out, it's going to mess up the previous 2 rounds that they've competed in. So only delete contestants before the tournament begins. That's just my word of caution. If you go through and actually delete them after they've competed some rounds, it gets pretty messy, and I can honestly do a separate video on just fixing that mistake. If, let's say, there is a change with a particular partner, like we'll just use the Charlottesville SL here, that's simple. Just go in and change the name here of that particular individual, but you're also going to want to make sure that the last initial matches up with that. Otherwise, it might be confusing for the debaters when they're actually looking for their assignment. So that's some basics there with that. In the same way, if we just click save on anyone, it's going to jump to a new entry. So if somebody shows up at the tournament that was not previously registered, maybe the coach forgot to enter them in tab room, this would be the place to go ahead and enter it. And a note on that, you want to make it, look exactly like other ones. So for example, let's just say I'm going to add somebody to Covenant, and we'll make it a public forum debater. So I'm going to want to say Covenant, and we'll just use my initials for this. You notice how when I hit the tab key, it went ahead and created what it would look like on the actual schedule. The school is able to pop right up. You're still going to click search because you want to have that number filled in. If that number doesn't fill in, you're going to get a little warning message or an error message saying that there's no school associated with this. So even though the school popped up right away, still click search. You could hit enter as well and still work. For the speaker names, it even tells you what to do. So in this case, we'll use my name. and then we'll go ahead and click save. Since this is not an actual term I'm going to be running, throwing myself in there I don't think would matter too terribly much. So that's how to manually enter a contestant, also how to delete a contestant, as well as how to make changes with names in the case of like a public forum team. If you are going to try to transfer somebody from Lincoln Douglas to public forum, it's best just to delete them out and then just enter it as a whole new entry. Same thing if you're going to change a public forum to a Lincoln Douglas. And I say that because over here in the division area, that's a particularly difficult spot to change. So it's easier before the tournament starts to go ahead and just delete out that particular group and then put them in as something different if you're going to try to switch divisions. Okay, with that in mind, for contestant entry, I'm going to go ahead and just look at judges real quick, simply because it's the same exact deal. If there is a judge that doesn't show, let's just say Maury Brown here, you would click delete. Again, please make sure you do this before the tournament gets underway, because anything that Maury here has judged, if you delete them after the fact, it's going to mess up some of the results and how things look. One thing I may have neglected to go over is if you have a judge that's going to say arrive late, like let's just say Maury's going to show up for the second half of the day, we want to get rid of rounds 1 and 2. So that way they can show up for 3 and 4. Or if they're going to leave early, make sure you take them off for 3 and 4. If you notice, though, that when I do click on that, it does adjust how often they are available. So that does kind of matter there in terms of how that works. So just something to be there in mind. I know last time in the setup video, I talked about putting folks in for specific divisions, but this is something to bear in mind. Now, one thing I did not touch base on because I just felt like I was getting too technical and I wanted to go over the setup is what to do if you have an absolutely clean judge, but they're associated with the school. So for example, let's just say Kevin Hadley here. It's associated with Charlottesville, but or the coach has said that Kevin is completely clean. There's no association. They can totally judge Charlottesville people. What you're going to actually want to do then is you're going to want to change the school. I don't know if you recall or not, but in the previous video about setting up a tournament, one of the schools that I briefly went over was a school called Hired. There is no such school called Hired. It's automatically preloaded into TRPC so that in a case like this, you can type in Hired, click search, and that is now the school that Kevin is associated with. There are no contestants in Hired, so now Kevin can judge Charlottesville as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save that because now Kevin can judge Charlottesville. It's kind of handy because if you have an absolutely 100% clean judge, it's nice for them to be able to judge all of the schools, not just the school that brought them. So again, if there needs to be a name change, something to that effect, you certainly can. I will say that when you print off ballot labels, something I'm going to go over later in this, the judge name should be on the back there. If a judge is not around, but somebody else is available and you're able to hand it off to them, don't bother changing names in TRPC. Just simply say, hey, for this round, since Maury couldn't be there, you are now Maury Brown. So fill this out, turn it in, and you'll just put in the ballot for that. The only thing that would potentially become a conflict later is if we used Judge Andrew here to cover for Maury, and we just have him go by this name. If Andrew ends up getting assigned to one of the teams he saw, pretending to be Maury, that might be a little bit of a difficult situation. But that doesn't happen too terribly often, and it's something you tend to be more aware of. So, having gone over judge changes, having gone over contestant changes, I think we're at the point now where we're going to go ahead and start actually setting up rounds. So, what we need to look at. We need to be looking at operating here for displaying schedule and schedule options and entering ballots. These are the things we're going to be looking at. We'll look at printing in a little bit, but we're going to start with scheduling a round automatically.